This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Sunday Lunch Show on Teachers Talk Radio with Graham Stanley. Today I'll be looking at the science of learning. What is it and why has it recently become controversial? My special guest today is Alastair Grant.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Sunday Lunch Show, everyone. I planned something different this week, expecting to give an overview of some of the different talks I'd seen at 3 conferences I've been able to attend online recently, but quickly changed my mind when I came across Alastair Grant's reaction to one of those talks at the IATEFL conference that has been taking place this week. Former Teachers Talk radio host show Harry Waters and his daughter gave the closing plenary at this conference, but it was a plenary earlier in the week that seems to have garnered a lot of attention and a measure of controversy. And I found the plenary by Dr. Carolina Cooper-Tetzel on the science of learning to be fascinating. She works at the University of Glasgow. And it had, for me, I thought it had lots of great insights from the research studies into cognitive science. So then I was very surprised to see a video on Facebook afterwards by Alastair Grant, teacher and teacher educator based in Argentina, that was critical of the attention given to this topic. But what Alastair said really made me think. And so because of that reaction, I reached out to invite him to join me to expand upon the views he expressed in his video. And I'm very happy to say that despite the short notice, he readily agreed. Now, Alastair Grant is an experienced teacher, teacher trainer, academic director, English language teaching author, and public speaker. He is head of English at Colegio Nuevo de las Lomas in Buenos Aires and a teacher trainer for International House in Montevideo and Mexico. In addition, he has taught and lectured at 2 universities in Argentina and has also worked as a director of studies in Buenos Aires. I will be talking with Alastair about the science of learning after the Teachers Talk radio news.
Hi secondary school teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. set tasks, track participation, and provide personalised feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favourite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
According to a story on the BBC News website, more than 1/3 of secondary teachers have reported misogyny from pupils at their school in the last week. The BBC asked 6,000 secondary teachers about their experiences via the survey tool TeacherTap. About 40% of the teachers who responded also said they felt ill-equipped to handle this type of conduct. The government says it has published guidance for teachers on dealing with extreme ideologies and will protect children online. Teachers and parents are reported as saying they are increasingly worried about the misogynistic and violent content that children, especially boys, are being exposed to online. The survey results show that 39% of secondary teachers said they are aware of at least one incident of misogyny from a pupil in the last week. 1 in 10 said they were aware of more than one event, and 61% said they felt misogyny had increased since they started teaching. The report also focuses on research by UCL, which found teenage girls in England are significantly less likely to feel safe in school than their male peers since the pandemic. Further details and a case study from a school in Dudley can be found on the BBC News website. The BBC also reports that a former Dundee University principal has been named as the chairman of a new task force set up to help the struggling institution. Sir Alan Langlands will chair the new University of Dundee Strategic Advisory Task Force. The university faces cutting its workforce by 700 as it attempts to tackle a £35 million deficit. The Scottish Funding Council recently approved a £22 million support package for the university. An investigation has been launched into the reasons for the institution's deteriorating finances and how this came to be a surprise to the university's leadership. Unions have welcomed the announcement. Schools Week says a surge in schools making cuts shows they are rapidly heading towards the brink, and that this is threatening the government's promise to break down barriers to opportunity. A survey by the Sutton Trust says more schools are cutting teaching and support staff at this time more than any time since 2020. Nearly 1/2 of secondary school leaders said they are using pupil premium cash to plug gaps, the highest since the annual poll began in 2017. Schools Week revealed last month the funding issues schools face, including unfunded pay rises, increases to national insurance and other rising costs. The Sutton Trust said the findings, reported in detail in the article online, show Labour risks failing one of its own 5 missions, to break down barriers to opportunity for every child. Another key Labour pledge was to update the national curriculum, but 1/3 of secondary school leaders said they will reduce the choices they offer at GCSE because of funding constraints. The Sutton Trust is now calling for a new national strategy to close the attainment gap, including restoring the pupil premium to its full value, as it says this has fallen by 20% in real terms since 2014 to 15. A Department for Education spokesperson said, "The government has protected key education priorities through our plan for change." Finally, a team of 7 primary school pupils is hoping for success in the USA after qualifying for a World Robotics Tournament. Hartlepool Mail Online said the team from one of the town's primaries had been competing at regional and national levels since November and had made it through to the competition's final held next month in Dallas, Texas. The competition requires teams to design and build a robot able to hold and carry a ball, then score a goal as quickly as possible in 60 seconds. The primary is one of 3 schools representing the UK in the tournament. The team and local community have so far raised £12,500 of its £20,000 target needed to travel for the competition, and once in a lifetime opportunity. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm very happy to say that I'm here with Alastair Grant, my special guest for today. Alastair, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Graham. It's a nice, bright, sunny but chilly day here in Buenos Aires in Argentina. No, I'm well, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for agreeing to do this. I'm excited about our conversation today. And as I usually do, I would like to ask you about how you became a teacher. And maybe you could talk a little bit about your background and what you're up to these days.
Absolutely. So I became a teacher. It was a very definite decision on my part because I remember, I will never forget being at school, especially at my, primary and secondary, but at my secondary school, thinking, how on earth do these people stand up in front of this horrible bunch of which I was part, who are not paying attention, etc. And some of them were able to, or were not able to in any way get through to us, and others were. Excuse me. And the ones who were, and this is really touching on what we're going to talk about today, were the ones that I remember and the ones that my classmates remember as well. Not only, it was to do with the knowledge of the subject, but more than that, it was to do with the human contact that they had with us and the feeling that they were guiding us, leading us, and also in some ways being some kind of a role model as well. And then the opportunity didn't really present itself until I visited Argentina much later in life. I'm not going to give anyone ideas to how old I am, and visited a friend. I was here on holiday visiting one of my very good friends from university and school, actually. He was at the same secondary school I mentioned. And I thought, this is a very beautiful country. And I also visited where he where he worked, which was International House in the northern zone of Buenos Aires in San Isidro, and met his colleagues. I actually sat in on part of one of his classes, and I thought, this is fantastic. I would like to do this myself, and therefore did my basic teacher training qualification, my CELTA. I was in the last intake at when IH was at Piccadilly in London.
Oh, wow.
A long time ago, and then came out, and then things sort of spiraled from there because I was given the opportunity to do the IH Certificate in Advanced Methodology and present at conferences, and then of course the D word happened, the Delta, and that was it. After that, I thought, no, this is what I love doing, and 18 years later, I'm still here. My parents still want to kill me, but yeah, that's a brief history of how Alastair became a teacher, basically. And that, yeah, yes.
Did your parents expect you to return then shortly after you'd left? Did they think you would be only away for about a year or so?
That's kind of exactly, I remember saying something like that at the time. But you know what? I was also saying it to myself, Graham, because I was thinking, when I go back to the UK, I feel like, this is what I mean, back to the UK, I'm going to have to start again from wherever that was. Yeah. But no, I didn't expect to love teaching as much as I do. I thought I would like it, but not like this. Really not like this. And so, yes, it's interesting. It's a good question because I feel like going to the UK now is literally, it's going there on holiday. I feel like it's a nice place to visit on holiday rather than home anymore. This is my home now. And I have a wife and I have a son. So yeah, that's it basically.
Fantastic. And so you do, apart from the teaching, you do a lot of teacher training at the moment as well.
Yes.
And, how did you get involved in that? Was that something that just went naturally? You mentioned a little bit about speaking at conferences and stuff, and
right.
Were you given the opportunity to do more teacher training because of all of that?
Yes, definitely. And I feel it's such a good question you ask, Graham, because again, it excuse me, links to what we're going to talk about today, like the main topic, as it were, because I think what can often happen, I'm sure you can probably relate to this as well, is that people, when they leave, how can I put this, their countries of birth, if I can put it like that, when teaching somewhere else can very often, and I'm sure you'll agree, stay within their sort of expat bubble, as it were, for legitimate reasons, don't get me wrong. But I was given the opportunity at one particular event we had at International House by somebody who came, who worked for a local, he still works for a university here, Universidad Tecnológica Nacional, UTN University. It's one of the biggest public universities in the country, who said, really like what you were talking about, please come and give a talk at one of our events. And that was how can I put this, sort of entered the local education system, the Argentine education system. That was a sort of entry into that. But that has, from my point of view, is what's so important about teaching with a local context, what is actually happening within the country that you're teaching in, rather than trying to sort of stick a global template over things. But yes, that's what happened. And then since then, I was also then able to, I was given the opportunity to speak at some conferences in Montevideo, in Uruguay, and was then offered to become Director of Studies at International House in Montevideo, where I was in charge of teacher training for, I think it was 38 schools throughout Uruguay, which was fun, challenging, but fun. Yes, and it went from there, I would say. It went from there, yeah. Because now, like I said, I've been working for one particular university for 8 years, another one in the south of Argentina for 3, and also tutoring modules 1 and modules 3 of Delta, plus working for freelance for various international houses around the world, helping their candidates with Delta. There's a lot more to it than that, but yeah, that's like a potted history of me right now. Yeah.
Right. And as a teacher, it sounds like you've probably had a very wide range of teaching experiences of all ages and all levels, etc. Is there one particular group of learners that you like teaching above others?
Yes, it's so funny. Your questions are so good, Graham, because I feel like it's funny. If I could have scripted questions I'd like you to ask, it would be these ones. It's funny, but yeah. The short answer to your question is yes. This is one of the main jobs that I do. I'm head of English at a local secondary school. I run the English department there, and apart from running the department, I give myself the option every year of basically whether I want to teach or be head of department, observe teachers, which I do anyway, etc. And I always want to be in the classroom, and I nearly always choose 4th year, where the students are like 14, 15 years old. We have relatively big classes, so like anything between, well, it depends on your context, of course, but 25, 35 students. And they get the opportunity to sit for the Cambridge First Certificate exam, or B1 First. And I love it because it's getting to know them and getting to work with them. And I even love the frustration of thinking, for goodness sake, Alastair, why isn't this working out? Why am I not getting through to X amount of students in the class? And then working out how to do it. I feel like it's a problem-solving activity for me. I would never not want to do that, because many people have said to me, come on, if you don't have to be in the classroom, why would you want to be in the classroom? But it's what it's all about. I can't tell you seriously. It's the job that I love. It's the one I think, oh, yes, it's Tuesday. That means I'm going into the secondary school today.
I suppose it's also because when you do make progress with those students, it's a wonderful feeling, isn't it? I mean,
yes,
that age group, I think most teachers that I know would say that is probably the most problematic age to teach.
Yeah.
And yet it's the age that you like teaching the best, and also it's the one that you choose to do. And I think that shows just how much of a dedicated teacher you are, Alastair, I think, because it's the one that that way you can make the biggest progress, if you like, or the biggest challenge is that age group.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just what you said as well, which is about it's the one where you can see the challenge that you've got, but also getting through that challenge, how much progress you can make. And I think this is one of the key things about teaching for me. It's not, I mean, of course, this is nothing new. Fredo was talking about this some time ago now. It's not just transmitting knowledge from one pot to another pot, as it were, but it's how to do that. And I think if anyone who's listening to this wonderful program today or in the future thinks about their favorite teacher when they were at school, they probably wouldn't say, well, I loved Mr. Smith, my physics teacher, because of the amount he knew about Newton's laws of motion. It's probably not for that reason. I mean, I'm going to stick my neck out and say maybe it was the way Mr. Smith managed to connect with you, to inspire you, that sounds like a cliche, to inspire you, but I believe it as well. Like, I'll put it another way, to connect. Only connecting, and the importance of that, just to badly paraphrase Conrad, I think it was, who said only connect. Was it Conrad? But that's the thing for me, is the connection and seeing it work. I'm going to tell you something, sorry, but I'm going to tell you something because you just reminded me. About 3 years ago, I have a student who shall remain nameless, but she just wouldn't. And I couldn't get her to connect in class. And one day, one afternoon, we were practicing for a speaking exam. And I was sitting next to another student, and she was over here, sort of in the corner, as she tended to do. And she was looking over at what we were doing. And she said in Spanish, she said, ¿Qué hacen? What are you doing? And I said, well, no, we're practicing for the speaking exam. And she's, over a period of 5 minutes, she sort of shuffled her chair closer towards the group and then started participating and said, oh, I see what you mean about this picture, but I think, and then I just backed away, went to the front of the class, left them to it. And I remember I came home that evening and I said to my wife, you're not going to believe what happened in class today. This student, I'm not going to mention her name, she works in class. She was doing speaking practice, and I, again, sounds like exaggeration, cliche, whatever. I felt like I'd won the World Cup. Seriously, I did. I can't tell you the high. I got from that. It was like, I don't know what I did. Maybe it was nothing to do with me. Maybe I can't pat myself on the back, but she engaged in class today. By the way, she passed the international exam, and we've been sort of friends, as it were, in the school hall ever since. So yeah, things like that. That's what it's all about for me.
Amazing. Yes, yeah. It's those little moments. What you said about connecting with teachers. The reason why I became a teacher was for the very same reason. There were two teachers in particular when I was around 14 that I thought were amazing people and real role models for me. And one of them was a Spanish teacher. And the way that she was with the class, with everyone, I just thought, this is such a rewarding job.
Right.
And that's the main reason why I became interested in not only in becoming a teacher, but in moving to a Spanish-speaking country. Spain,
okay.
Because of that.
Well,
I want to be able to speak Spanish.
Well, wow. So yes, she connected to the extent that it was not just about, okay, yes, it was certainly the connection and it encouraged you, but also made you feel like you wanted to know more about I don't know, I'm sort of putting words in your mouth. Yeah, exactly. That's it. Yeah. The culture, the background, which is really a very important thing, the culture of somewhere and identity, which I know we're going to talk about as well. So yeah.
Definitely. And just one more thing, and then I think we can probably start talking about our main topic today.
Sure, absolutely.
As in what you said about that wonderful experience with your student, that you managed to connect with it. I think you should take credit for it, to be honest. I think, even if it came from within her, you provided the means for her to be able to do that. And a teacher can definitely do the opposite. If I go back to being a 14-year-old, we had a chemistry teacher at the school where I work, and I was school where I went to, and I was put off science and chemistry because of that teacher. For life. He just wasn't inspiring. He wasn't interested in us. He was demotivated. He was probably he kind of did anything but teach us chemistry. We used to argue with them. He talked about his children in class for long periods of time rather than, and we thought, what are we learning about chemistry?
Why are we here?
And so it really put me off moving towards a more science background, which I love physics, for example. And yet it turned me off the whole subject.
I sometimes think maybe that's one of the reasons I'm so bad, or consider myself so bad at mathematics, is because the maths teacher that I had, certainly in primary, was similar to yours, although at least you got some anecdotes out of yours, because in my case it was, if you don't understand, and I'm not exaggerating, if you don't understand, it's because you're not intelligent enough. There's nothing we can do. Great. Where do we go from there? So, not a good experience. Yeah.
Just one more anecdote, and then we'll move on.
Great.
You've just reminded me, because of maths. I performed terribly at maths when I was at school, and failed my O-level at the time, GCSE.
Me too.
Because of I'm sure it's because the teacher kind of left us behind. I didn't feel like I was seen by the teacher. I felt I was just one of a number of students in the class, and I didn't grasp a lot of the concepts. And I actually ended up having to go at home asking my dad to help me with maths in particular, to kind of explain things. But even so, I didn't pass. Then the year after, I took maths again, when I was at sixth form college, and the teacher was brilliant, gave us exactly what we needed concept wise, checked that we understood everything before moving on, gave us individual attention, and I passed with a B.
Wow.
After a kind of attending his class. So again, that I use that as an example of just show the power of a particular teacher and a particular teacher, how that one teacher can have such an impact upon students with the way of doing things.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's because, again, it's the same subject, the same student, i.e. you. What was the difference? The teacher was the difference.
The teacher was the difference.
Yeah, maths hadn't changed. You hadn't changed. Okay, maybe you were slightly older by a few months or whatever it was, but the difference is the teacher. That's it.
Yeah, it really showed. It really shows me the power of a teacher and the importance of what you mentioned before, that connection that a teacher can have with students. And if that hadn't have happened, if that hadn't happened, then I may have left thinking that maths wasn't something that I could do.
Right. Whereas you discovered that it was, and it wasn't about maths. The problem wasn't maths, and the problem wasn't you. And I'm not that I'm saying, okay, the entire blame is necessarily at the door of this teacher, but having a different one, yes, it does. Yeah, it does totally make a difference.
It's that thing, and we'll come on to this. In fact, there is quite a lot of research that shows one of the biggest factors in education is the teacher. So the importance of the teacher is a very big factor, and that's backed up by research, which brings us nicely to the main reason we decided to talk today.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
So, as I mentioned in the introduction, I've been watching the plenaries, and one of the plenaries that at IATEFL in Edinburgh this week, and one of the plenaries that most caught my attention was by Dr. Caroline Cooper-Ketzel, who is senior lecturer in psychology, and she was talking about the science of learning. And I really was fascinated by her plenary. I thought it was probably the best one that I watched out of all the plenaries on IATEFL.
Yeah.
It seemed to make a lot of sense. And I was going to speak about just how much I found it interesting on today's show. And then I saw a video that you posted, which wasn't particularly about her plenary, but it was more about the idea of this focus on the science of learning that you feel has been given to English language teaching, education in general, I suppose. And you made some very strong sort of arguments about why you felt it needs to be questioned, I think. I'd love to hear perhaps what your, your response to seeing that plenary was very different from my response,
And
what it is that you, perhaps for our listeners, think is what it is about the science of learning that requires some kind of critical
questioning. Yes,
question.
certainly. So I think first of all, if we go back to the most recent method, as it were, dogma, ELT, Scott Thornberry, I'm sure you remember, and your listeners will remember as well, that there was so much noise around that. Not just back in 2000 when the Yahoo group was formed and when his IATEFL magazine article came out, A Dogma for ELT, but there were so many dissenting voices. And the fact that he then had I won't use the word I'm thinking of, the courage, I will put it like that rather than a different word, to say, you know what I mean, to set up a Yahoo group so that teachers could comment on this and talk about this and debate this and dialogue this, was one of the strengths of Dogma. Because what that meant is that everyone got to contribute, even people who were saying, for perfectly legitimate reasons, come on, Scott, would this really work in the classroom? So this is my Argentine coming out in me. Would this really work in an everyday classroom? How can we do this with 45 students in a secondary school, for example? Great, because that opens it up to debate. And things that can't stand up to debate, what are they then? They are dogma, they are orthodoxy. So if something's being set up as truth, I think this is where I'm coming from. If something's being set up as truth, it worries me. It was a red flag. It was a red flag reading the abstract to the talk. Discourse like evidence-based, etc., makes it sound like we are telling you facts. This is the truth. And if you don't like it, sorry, but that's the way it is now. I think, again, if we just analyze the discourse for a second here, how can you call something science of learning, just the title, without sounding like you are stamping authority onto something by calling it science? Because we know that we can't argue with science, right? So if we're calling it science of learning, there's no debate about it. With one fell swoop, you are managing to get rid of debate about it because it's science. And science is to do with laws. I mean, if you look at Carl Sagan's amazing book, The Demon Haunted World, there's so many instances of how prior to science, we were, burning women saying that they were witches, for example. Then science steps in and all those old fears, as it were, go away. And I feel like what's happening by calling it science of learning is that we're doing ourselves a disservice in a way, because we're saying that there can't be a debate about these things. There shouldn't necessarily be a dialogue about these things. This is the way things are. And that's not something that you can challenge because science is just a collection of facts. The question then is, where do those facts come from? Because we're not talking about looking at the speed of light in a vacuum, which in all contexts would be the same. We're not talking about Newton's laws of motion, which in all contexts would be the same. We're talking about research that has been carried out in the global north in select settings and has yielded a certain amount of results. Then one of my issues is the overgeneralization of that. But sorry, I feel like I'm just ranting a bit now. So maybe you should ask a question before I go on, because I could, but I feel like I'm going to end up ranting a bit.
No, of course, and that's fine. I think, Alastair, one of the reasons why I brought you on was to give you an opportunity to kind of expound upon the views that you made in a short video as a kind of response to that. But I'm going to kind of say, I think in the actual plenary, that it wasn't just research from the global north. Iran was present and other countries. So I think one of the interesting things I did find within the plenary, you don't have to talk about the plenary in particular. I think it'd be more interesting to talk about the science of learning, and you make some good points in general. But so maybe we can stay away from the actual plenary. But I think just to kind of make sure that it's not misrepresented.
Yes, of course.
At the very beginning of the plenary, she actually says, "This, you're the experts, you're the teachers, you're in the classroom. I'm not trying to say this is relevant to your context or to all contexts. I'm just presenting an overview of some of the studies that I think you should know about if you want to, to help your learners in a particular way." So that said, let's move away from the actual plenary, because I think everyone can kind of watch that. The recording is available. I'll make it available in the show notes.
Perfect. That's a good idea.
And decide for themselves. But this idea of the science of learning, I'm going to say that I think a lot of what you said rings true. True to me, which is why I thought it would be interesting to talk. There's also this idea that when you move away from the micro, as in away from the classroom or observe, even a school setting, which I'm not saying that you should move away from it, because that's where things actually happen. The learning actually happens with a teacher and a student, the students in the classroom, in a particular classroom, in a particular school, particular context, which is what you talked about before. And I think there's and those contexts change, those students change, and all of that we talked about earlier makes sense that you need all of that in account. But if you are in a position where you move away from that and then start moving towards the macro, which is the case in my role in particular, I kind of have moved out of the classroom, out of the school. I try and still keep in touch with that aspect of things, but obviously you can't be everywhere. And you can't. Of course. My focus is more of a kind of macro thing. And when you look at the policy making of education, of language teaching, and then looking at things from a point of view of they have to justify value for money and stuff like that. One of the things, I think, the reason why the science of learning and other such research becomes prioritized is because they're trying to understand how to make changes on a large scale that they can detect, that they can prove to the taxpayers, the voters, their government, whoever else, the press, that what they're doing is actually having an effect and making improvements. Now, I think this is probably where this idea of trying to quantify results, look for evidence, and treating what happens in teaching and learning as a science comes from. I'm not saying that's problematic in itself, but I'm saying that's probably where this comes from. I'll stop again and over to you.
No. Why? My question is why? Why is there a need to do that? Because you mentioned value for money. So what's that about? Why is there the need to do that? Why is there the need to quantify? As in, I suppose where I'm coming on with is, who does that serve? Which of the stakeholders in language teaching does it serve? Does it serve the students? Does it serve the teachers? Or who else does it serve? It's a genuine question. And I feel like I also know that this research, and I'm not going to mention big players' names, but that it's paid for by some very big companies. I'm not going to mention who those companies are, who's involved, etc. But there seems to be, and I'm really willing to be challenged, disproven, whatever on this, but a vested interest in this research being carried out, because it's not cheap to do this kind of thing. And it is quantitative research, by the way. And qualitative research is something that I'd like to mention as well, but it is quantitative research. So why is that happening? That's my question. Where's that need coming from? I mean, to be honest, I think you probably said it yourself about value for money, which makes sense. Then to me, it feels like the question is, like I say, who is that serving? Where does that take us as well? Because it seems to be that there's understandably, like you mentioned, value for money, that things need to be, like science of learning presents itself as, cognitive and measurable. I think one of the issues with that is that it's sort of normalizing a specific way of thinking. And it, again, calling it science of learning, it appears to be common sense, but really I feel like it's serving some kind of dominant ideology. And then this is where I'm coming from. Where is the need to do this? Where does that need come from? Where is the need for the research, and does it help the people who it's supposed to be helping? It really feels like, if we're talking about, it's because it's valuing empirical data. One of the problems with the quantifying aspect of that is that it's championing empirical data over lived experience. I mean, Pierre Bourdieu talks about cultural capital, and that, to me, it feels like what's going on here, because somebody owns that cultural capital. And it seems to be, and I know what you said, and I know you want to, understandably step aside slightly from the plenary itself, and about how, okay, the speaker was saying that they're not trying to stick a template over somebody's local context. But I think this is what Gramsci would say. It's like saying, you're the experts, which is quite a flattering thing to say. And there's a reason for that discourse as well. I'm sorry, but there's a reason for that discourse as well. But by the way, this is the proof. And it feels like it's actually, in a very sort of subtle way, delegitimizing the embodied knowledge of the practitioners, which is the teachers. That's how I feel about it. I feel like there's voices that are being silenced by saying that. That's how I feel about it. By that kind of representation. Again, I go back to the question, why is that being carried out, that research? And I go back to what you said about value for money.
Sorry, Alastair.
No,
all very legitimate questions, I think, and we need to have these discussions, and there need to be critical voices, I think, with anything that is presented in this way. So I think that is all very welcome. I think for me, one of the problems is that there seems to be perhaps a bigger picture, is this disconnect between the classroom, the teacher, the learner, and the policymakers, the organized commercial organizations.
Yes.
And one of the things we need to be very careful about is, you've already hinted at it, is like, if there is research carried out, what's the agenda? What's behind that? Is this research being carried out, or is the evidence being presented because whoever's presenting it wants to kind of show something that a teacher can then change their practice to help the learners learn better? Or is there some kind of commercial reason behind that, which is either apparent or not apparent? So it's a bit like the tobacco companies or the oil companies paying for climate change research, or the tobacco companies paying to show that actually smoking cigarettes isn't as damaging as possible. So whenever there's big money involved in commercial interests, you always have to be very skeptical and critical of things. And so I think what is interesting is for us to maybe to go and have a look in more detail at some of the evidence that is presented in these science of learning situations, just to have a look.
Yeah, I feel it's not, sorry to jump in, but I feel like, and
sure.
I totally agree with what you said. And it's not only the evidence, because again, look, I feel like, again, this is what Steven Pinker, the North American linguist, talks about factive terminology. Words like learn, understand, truth, evidence, etc. Again, these are all, this is Discourse 101. These are all what are called lexical presuppositions. If you're saying something is evidence-based, then again, it just manages to eschew debate. You just mentioned where this is coming from, and I want to say something about where it's going. I'm looking to my right because I have a sort of raft of course books here, and on the back of a lot of those course books, it talks about this course book, whatever the title might be, closely follows the communicative approach. I'm sure you've seen many like this. I'm sure your listeners have seen many like this as well. Now, Delheims comes up in whenever it was, late 60s, with the concept of not the communicative approach, but the ways in which that we are able to communicate, which, there's lexical strategies, there's sociocultural implications, there's discourse, etc. But then all of that, which I think is perfectly legitimate, becomes very marketable. And this is where I'm going with this. I think that there are this is what I said in the video, that there are some people who stand to make a mint out of this, because then suddenly the blurbs and the scope and sequence of texts are going to be reading like, this incorporates the science of learning, which is evidence-based, and the research has proven that, etc., etc. And it's so seductive because it's so binary. And suddenly, again, we can say, because, there has been this vacuum left since the brilliant Diane Larson Freeman back in 2000 talked about principled eclecticism and complexity. This is the other thing, Graham. What happens to complexity of language theory after? Sorry, I'm not going to get onto that now. Anyway, principled eclecticism comes along and says, for, again, very good reasons, look, no one's really going to go into a classroom these days and just do grammar translation or audiolingualism, although as I understand it, it does happen. I've seen it myself. And I'm not knocking those necessarily, but we can cherry pick from different methods and approaches. And these things work and these things maybe wouldn't work in your context. So what you've got to do, and this is something that I tell my trainee teachers, is when you go to teacher training conferences and you hear X person talking about X thing, do think about your context and how that may or may not work in your context. And if there are bits that need perhaps adapting and changing, then that's definitely what needs to happen. But one of the issues with it is saying, all right, this vacuum that has been left since 2000, something has stepped into this. I feel like the title, which is a very powerful title, Science of Learning, has stepped into this vacuum and said, it's all right, guys, science is here now. We'll take it from here. Everyone just relax. You go off and sit in the corner, direct method. Well done, principled eclecticism. You can just chill out. Let the adults take it from here. And it feels like, come on. I mean, this is totally delegitimizing the experience of teachers who know their students. We were talking before this started about the teachers that I connected with, the teachers that you connected with. And I think we would both agree that it wasn't necessarily because they were unparalleled in their knowledge of their field, which could be, but it's also to do with the connection. And I think that, yeah, that's somewhere else I'm coming from with this. Anyway, sorry, I feel like I'm running with the ball again slightly, Graham. So I'm gonna
No,
be
no,
quiet again and have some water.
That's fine, Alastair, but I think you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter. For me, a teacher, if the teacher knows so much,
Yeah.
but they don't connect with the learners,
Yes.
then the learners aren't going to learn. So it's not so much about how
Right.
much of an
Right.
expert the teacher is,
Right.
but because, unless the learners respect, trust, and are motivated by the
Yes.
person in front of them who is in the classroom is teaching, and they
Yeah.
feel that they're able to have their own voice, etc., then you can admire someone for what they know, but you might not learn from them if you don't actually think that what they know is relevant to a particular context in the classroom,
Right.
or to their lives.
That's
Definitely.
it, Graham. That's it. And this is where Alberto Bandura is coming in with the whole concept of observational learning hypothesis. This is, your favorite teacher at schools, my favorite teacher at school, my English teacher, actually, it was at the time, Mrs. Maitland. I've talked about her before, but I thought, I want to imitate this person. And this is what you were saying about your Spanish teacher as well, right?
Yeah.
It's not just what she knew. It's like, I want to imitate this person. This is a role model for me. If we unpack this a little bit about science of learning, there's an emphasis on individual cognition and this encoding, storage, and retrieval of information. And it focuses on this internal mental process, which, again, I'm not saying that we don't have those. This is the other thing. I'm not knocking the research. I'm not knocking the science. I wouldn't know where to begin with that. But it feels like the teachers are therefore facilitators of cognitive performance improvements. That's the thing. And like all, and you mentioned this before, this need to have a global take on this. There is this, like I said in the video, this emphasis on a one-size-fits-all approach. If we look at, for example, sociocultural learning theory, Lev Vygotsky, The Mind and Society, as he points out, learning is social before it's cognitive. It is social before it's cognitive. We develop through interaction, not isolation. He says what the child can do in isolation tomorrow, he's done because he did it in collaboration today. So it's not that language is a tool for thinking. It's a tool for thinking and constructing meaning together. This is the whole idea of the zone of proximal development. And what you're talking about with the relationship between the teacher as well, it happens through dialogue and co-construction. It doesn't happen in isolation. So again, the teacher's role, going to Brunner now, is scaffolding. It's not about standardizing, it's about scaffolding. So what's crucial here, again, and it's got to be like this, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, is context, culture, and history as well. It's about that co-construction. It's about the dialogue and meaning making. Again, Freire talks about the dialogic. Again, we're not pouring knowledge into a student's head. We're talking about co-constructing it. And, I don't know about you, I'm sure you'll agree, but I've learned so much from my students about my own language, by the way. One of my students, anecdote now, here we go. This isn't very science of learning, anecdote. One of my students said, "Hey, Alastair, you're really Sigma." And I thought, what does that mean? Internet terminology. I'm Generation X, do not understand Generation Alpha terminology at all. There you go. That's a bit science of learning, what I just said, the Generation Alpha and Generation X. I'm sure that's not a global thing. Anyway, so I looked it up, Graham, to my shame. Sigma.
And what does it mean? Or what did
Because
your
all the other
students
kids in the class,
mean by
that's
it?
the thing, all the other kids in the class were going, yeah. And I thought, okay, at least maybe it's not an insult. And it meant something like cool older guy.
Cool older guy.
Cool older guy. And I thought,
Wow.
okay, it could be worse. It could be a lot worse. But my point is purely, this is something I learned from my students. And it's a crass example, but that's what I was coming from. Co-construction of knowledge. Yes, go on, sorry.
But then, Alastair, I think I'm sure you agree with me. You learn how to really be a teacher by the time you spend in the classroom with learners. So you can learn about teaching from
Yes.
courses
Yes.
or books, etc.
Yes.
But actually,
Yes.
the face-to-face time that you spend in front of learners, if you are a teacher who, and I'm sure most teachers are, reflect upon the experience, what went well, what didn't went well, what could I do differently, etc. That's the whole thing. It's a practice, isn't it? It's something that you get better at by practicing.
Exactly. It's something that you get better at by practicing. I would totally agree with that. Because apart from anything else, I think bringing Vygotsky into this again for a second, what he might say to what you said as well is, this doesn't, why are we measuring what learners remember or they can do in isolation rather than what they can do with others? Because that cognition without culture is just a shadow of learning. And that's what I think we're seeing with Science Learn. It's a shadow of what really goes on inside the classroom. What you're talking about with the practice of it as well is this construction, is this construction of the narrative. And I do think it's to do with that. I mean, again, I'll tell you something. When I first started teaching here in Argentina, I suppose I'm not embarrassed to say, I was really scared going into the secondary school where I'm now head of department. I would sit in the taxi that would take us there, and the closer it got, I thought, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. Because I was genuinely intimidated by not a huge class, 33 students I had back in 2007. I thought, I can't do this. And then one day, something clicked. And instead of saying, I can't do this, I thought, something's working. And what seemed to be working was me going to individual students and having little chats with them. What now is apparently called micro-teaching. Didn't know that at the time, but little chats with them. Oh, how are you getting on over here? What about this? Did you see that amazing Messi goal, the football at the weekend? My God, he's amazing, isn't he? Wish we had an English player like him. Will probably never happen. Ha ha, that kind of conversation.
Hi secondary school teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering math circles across the UK.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
But that was it, and it was practice, Graham, and that's it. It was so many failures. That's the other thing that I learned from. I'm sure you've had that. I'm sure probably every teacher who's listening to that has had that as well.
Yeah, that all rings true. And I don't think your experience of the fear of going into the classroom, that's something that I've experienced. That's something that I think every teacher has experienced, and that you need to, find a way of moving beyond it and getting to grips with it, or you wouldn't continue being a teacher, I think.
Yes.
Because I don't think it's an enjoyable thing to have. But so, although teaching is a practice, I think what is really interesting is, and you've mentioned a lot of sources, you're very well read and understand theory of learning and of language teaching very, very well, Alastair, from all of the references you've brought up, which I think is fantastic. But it's also about evidence, isn't it? As you've shown through that. So the research and evidence, the theories of teaching, they do influence how we teach, even if it's just they inform what is in the books that we use to teach. They inform us as teachers, etc. In our courses, when we learn to become teachers, or the CPD that we take to extend our knowledge of teaching and what works, etc. But there does seem to be, I think, a little bit of a divorce, and then it brings me back to another plenary that happened this week at the IATEFL conference. This idea of research, unfortunately, to a certain extent, is quite often divorced from practice. And the researchers, I'm not saying all researchers, but a lot of researchers kind of research what they're interested in when it comes to understanding about language, but that very often doesn't make its way down to the actual classroom and the teachers for lots of different reasons. One is that teachers don't have any time to be up to date with the latest research, because they're too busy teaching and having lots of different jobs, as you're a great example of that. But also a lot of the research is behind paywalls, so teachers can't get hold of original research. They need to have other people who enable them to understand about it. But then also there are all sorts of other aspects of it. But it is important that what we do in the classroom is informed by evidence and research. You're not arguing against that at all, are you?
No. Like I say, I'm not knocking the research itself, and I'm not knocking the evidence. I think I'm knocking the discourse that surrounds it, as in there isn't an alternative. I think what would have been great or what would be great, rather than what would have been great, is if somebody were to, again, bring in narrative into this. And by narrative, I mean local context, as in, all right, here's the evidence presented in this school. This is what worked with, well, not what worked. This is what happened with these students in this context, with this age group. And by the way, this is what these students like to do at their weekends. This one has ADHD. This one has a really complicated family situation, etc. So it feels like, you know what would help in that case with the science of learning is if it weren't called the science of learning, because then it would be like, all right, this is how it applies to some context. And you've just put your finger on it, Graham, by talking about the disconnect, that divorce between those two things. And I think it's probably why it feels alienating, because this is the thing. It feels like the knowledge, as it were, the power is being placed outside of the classroom. This is something I said in the video, and somewhere above the teacher. And if it were brought down to some kind of, again, contextual level, I think that would be really helpful. I mean, again, I mentioned the word narrative because it's something that, I mean, apart from scaffolding theory, it's something that Brunner talks about, is that knowledge is not just something that's stored in memory, it's woven into identity. Because this is really important, the concept of identity, the student's identity and the teacher's identity. The teachers and learners are not data points, they're storytellers living through experience, because you just mentioned this yourself as well, Graham. The idea of, okay, maybe the research is behind a paywall, so there is someone who acts as a sort of window, as it were, for that. Again, that's narrative, that's lived experience, and I think having an angle on that lived experience would be really helpful, because learning is very much situated, it's interpretative, and it's personal as well. There's something brilliant that Brunner says about narrative, that life is not how it is lived. It's not a collection of facts. It's how it's told and retold, even to ourselves. It's through narrative that we create meaning in our lives. So it's not that the science of learning is wrong. It may be incomplete, dehumanizing, and unbalanced when it's allowed to dominate. And that's what I mean. Where is the teacher's experience in this? It feels like that's just, it's being avoided. And I think it would be something that would really help, is if it were placed within a specific situation. All right, this is how it could be made to work in your context. And like I say, one of my biggest issues is calling it the science of learning in the first place. I think it's setting it up as something that it's power, it's hegemony 101. This is power, this is knowledge, this is research, this is uncontestable. And the trouble with that is that the more that gets told, the more it becomes something that becomes accepted by X amount of cultures. And if it becomes accepted, then it's uncontestable. And that's where we get into dodgy territory for me, because then it becomes like this, the teachers, it feels like then the teacher is a practitioner of this, and they become this sort of blank slate on which global capitalism can write its message. And all I'm saying, and all I think we need to do more of, is just ask questions. And it's not about destroying evidence, you see those YouTube videos sometimes where it says, I don't know, X person destroys blah, 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 whatever it is, which is very clickbaity. It's more about just asking the questions. I do feel like in our industry, Graham, there's not enough dissent. There's not enough skepticism. There's not enough critical thinking about those things. I mean, I'm going to shut up in a minute, I promise. But going back to what I mentioned in my video, Michel Foucault, the French historian of ideas and philosopher, talking about any discourse you're presented with, ask simple questions. Who's giving this message? Why are they giving this message here and now? And then crucially, who does the message benefit? And then who does the message hurt? And I'm not just talking about science of learning, but any new discourse. This is, again, one of the wonderful things about Dogma ELT, when Scott set that group up, was he opened it up for everyone. Like, come on then, let's talk about this. This is why I'm giving the message. Who does it benefit? Who does it hurt? Why am I giving it here and now? And there were all these voices involved in it. And this is like saying, science of learning is like saying, you know what? Debate's not important because this is evidence-based. These are the facts. I'm now going to stop talking.
No, some very interesting points and very strong arguments, Alastair, there. I think it's interesting what you say about the term science of learning is what you're suspicious about, if you like, or if you don't like it, because science has been introduced into the world of ELT in the past, and we have become a lot more critical of things that are presented as scientific methods or ideas. There are two I'll put forward. One is learning styles. So a lot of the discourse and dialogue and so-called research that was presented with learning styles was kind of surrounded by a lot of scientific language, etc. This is what is the case. You need to label your students as auditory learners, etc.
Yes, and multiple intelligences.
Multiple intelligence is another one. The other one I was going to mention is neuro linguistic programming,
NLP.
NLP. So what I think is really interesting is that those three, and I'm sure there are a lot more ideas, have started to become a lot more, have started to become questioned, and a lot of the arguments against why they should not be used, even though they seem to persist, is because of the evidence or lack of evidence that these things are actually based on any kind of reality,
evidence, etc. Right?
So I think where evidence-based teaching and learning really starts to become important is when it is able to present or not present evidence of why you should or shouldn't use a particular type of teaching method or approach or activity, etc. So I think having a kind of more evidence-based approach to what we do in education in general, language teaching and learning specifically, I think is a good thing. But I do also wonder about some of the language that is used to describe these things in the way that you do as well.
Can I say something about what you just mentioned about learning styles and multiple intelligences now that you brought that up? Because let's imagine for a second, because you're talking about research, and of course I have read I don't know how many articles. By the way, my saying that isn't some kind of appeal to authority logical fallacy. What I mean by that is I've seen the evidence presented that says it's not the case. And in fact, if anything, maybe people are visual learners and nothing else just because that's the way humans are. But I'm going to ask a slightly rhetorical question. Learning styles and multiple intelligences. And I won't pretend to know enough about NLP to talk about it, I admit. But learning styles and multiple intelligences. So let's say it's been debunked. Great. Because I saw, I can't remember who wrote it, but a LinkedIn post a few months back saying, it's very strange how on, for example, Delta Module 3, people still talk about learning styles and multiple intelligences where the whole thing's been debunked. And there were lots of links to academia.eu with peer-reviewed articles talking about the debunking of learning styles and multiple intelligences. It's been debunked, right? Now what? We just don't talk about it anymore? Do you see what I mean? Okay, now what do we do? Do we not talk about it anymore, or what do we do? And I think what's very interesting about it is that I'm going to come out as a massive multiple intelligences fan now by saying, don't panic, by saying, at the very least, these things are very helpful for us as teachers to understand learner preferences and how they prefer to consume information. Author of Father of Flow Theory, Cesar Michaux, talks about how if we can control, because everything is presented to us in a form of information, and if we can control that, then we can control the quality of our life, he says, which is quite a claim. But if at the very least it helps us with the idea of, right, this teacher prefers to consume information in this way. They much prefer to consume information or do tasks in class which are interactive. This one is much more of, sorry to say it, but Honey and Montfort, this is much more of a reflective learner. And I know that there's some confirmation bias in this, but I bet that if your listeners look at Honey and Mumford's 4 learning styles, activist, theorist, reflector, and pragmatist, they can easily point out some of those learners in the classroom, or at least varying percentages of that. And at the very least, I think it's helpful to think about learner preferences. So again, I don't think this debunking is that helpful. Okay, great. Scientifically, it's been debunked. So what do we do now? We just don't talk about it, or what? Was it completely unhelpful? No, it wasn't completely unhelpful at all, because it's pointed us in the direction of focusing on learner preferences, which wasn't really around that much before. And I think there's some very positive things that teachers and students can get out of that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that you said, Alastair. I think my beef and a lot of other people's beef with learning styles, multiple intelligences, is the labeling. It's the kind of categorization of learners.
Yes,
you're a visual learner because
right. No, I agree. That
you all that. It's that aspect of things. I think learners do develop preferences. They have preferences. I know that when I'm listening to something, when I was listening to the plenary, for example, I know that if I take notes, it's going to be more valuable for me. So I don't need to. I don't need to watch the screen unless just to sort of see what was on the slides. But I'm not going to remember what the speaker says because of an image on the screen. So what does that mean? It means that I benefit from writing notes to understand and learn. And that's a preference, or it's a strategy. Now, I think the interesting thing here is that it's a preference and a strategy that if other learners haven't tried it, maybe they should try it. But if you're being labeled as a particular type of learner, then you know, I think in the way it's done us a disservice in general. It's moved out into the wider public's consciousness. So I'm always hearing people say, oh, well, I'm a visual learner. And this person says it as if this is a fact. And I'm not going to try and learn in another way because someone told me at some point with such authority that this is the type of learner I am, and this has then become part of my identity. And I always kind of like, I'm shocked when I hear that. I was like, don't say that, please, because it just means that you're closing your mind to learning in different ways, etc. So I think that's where I think this idea of learning styles has got off to and about it's been debunked. I think there needs to be a lot more kind of contextualization, doesn't there? There needs to be this idea of, well, everyone develops their own preferences to how they learn, what works for them, which is great. And we should, as teachers, understand that to be the case. And we should be guiding our learners to try out different things and to understand how things can be learnt in different ways. And I think evidence can help with that.
I think that, certainly that idea of pushing students as well to learn in different ways, I think is very valuable. I see myself, or used to see myself, for example, as, again, anecdotal, but as someone who's not particularly sporty. I'm not particularly. And then I remember deciding one day to go for a run, and ended up years later running 2 full 42-kilometer marathons. And I thought, where did that come from? Because I'd always been told at school, which is where I'm going to circle back to with this, that wasn't me. I wasn't a sporty person. And when this is about labeling, again, like you've mentioned with labeling students, this is the thing. This is one of the problems with both Fleming's theory and Gardner's theory, is if they are making claims that one person is this, one person is that, I think that's dangerous, because that means that perhaps a practitioner of learning styles wouldn't want to try anything else with a student, whereas perhaps they should. But where I came from with the sport aspect of this was feeling like, okay, I've been told at school that I'm not this kind of person. I'd like to push that. Maybe I would like to try it out. And then that aspect of it worked out for me, and it worked out for me well. And it's something that I still like doing to this day. But therefore, and it's something that when we were having our conversation about your maths teacher as well, and like my maths teacher at school, the right person to do that, this is coming back to what you said about somebody not transmitting knowledge, you didn't say that, but somebody being, how can I put this? Somebody being the filter between some kind of theory and the receivers of the theory. And I think it's all to do with that. And this comes back to the zone of proximal development as well. A learner's thinking, okay, I could get here, and I can only do that with the help of this other person. And I feel like if we're in any way calling that into question, then that's not okay. And again, just to reiterate, I'm not knocking evidence. I'm not knocking that. I'm not knocking research. What I'm doing is I'm questioning why the research was carried out, who's paying for the research, and why it was being grandstanded and showpieced at the largest teaching conference in the world as a plenary session. I don't think it's a coincidence. I'm going to leave that there as a question hanging in the air. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I'm not worried that it was given that amount of attention because I really thought I appreciated it, and I think I haven't seen that type of plenary before at a conference, and I really was interested in the actual details and data and evidence that was said. So I would just we don't have to talk about that anymore. I would just say, if anyone is interested, I recommend you have a look at it yourself and make up your own mind, really. And
that's it. You just said it. You just said it. Make up your own mind.
Exactly.
That's what I think is true. And asking questions of it, not just accepting it. That's what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't have been there. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to make this clear. Okay. I'm not saying that it shouldn't have been there. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, okay, if it's there, why is it there? Let's go back to Foucault's questions and asking about who's giving the message, why is it being given here and now? Who does it benefit and who does it hurt? I'm not saying that should be silenced. I'm saying let's just ask why. Yeah.
No, and they're all very important questions. I think we need to be more critical. As you said earlier, we can't just go to a conference, watch any plenary, and just say, this is the truth. We need to be critical of whoever's talking. Does this ring true to me? Is what they're saying, does it feel right? Even if they're presenting evidence, does that evidence ring true to my context? There are so many times that I've heard people speak at conferences, well, not so many times, but times when they presented things and I'm like, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel like it's kind of like, it doesn't reflect what happens in my classroom or my experience, etc. And I think it's very important for anyone to have that critical thinking, particularly these days when we're being presented with so many lies in society in general. That there are a lot of people who just decided that I'm just going to lie to people to get what I want. And that seems to be the case, doesn't it? Although we don't need to go there because that's particularly dangerous territory, I think.
But I think all of this is, and if someone's on a platform like I know exactly what you're talking about, by the way. But if someone's on a platform and if someone is presenting something to you as being true, there are plenty of people who simply won't question it. Yeah.
So, Alastair, we've been talking for quite a while now. I'm going to wrap things up. This has been fascinating. I've really enjoyed learning from you, I'm going to say, because I have learned. And the opportunity to question how I feel about something is always, always welcome. So thank you for that.
Thank you. No, that's one of the things I loved about your invitation to talk about this, Graham, was exactly what you've said, as in, okay, this is something that's being presented, a different point of view has been presented, so let's think about that as an alternative. And by the way, I can't quite think of the expression I want to say, but what you have mentioned about the topic today makes me want to rewatch the plenary as well, to think about it more in like, okay, in a local context. And I think that's the thing. Is the most important thing is when things are decontextualized, and feeling like as a student, for example, or as an audience member, maybe you're not seen by the presenter, you're not seen by the teacher, and it's that human connection that I think is the most important thing.
Yeah, I really wish I'd been able to be there, because I know that as happens, and I think this is a great thing at the IATEFL conference, with all of the plenaries, the same day in the afternoon or the next day, if the plenary was in the afternoon, there's an opportunity for you to go and talk to the speaker and question them, etc. And I'm sure if you had been there, and I'm sure if I'd been there, we'd both be in that room asking questions or listening to a kind of more nuanced kind of discussion that I'm sure took place. Unfortunately, I don't think that was recorded, so we'll just have to.
And it should be, but yeah, that's the word, nuance. And we don't want to witness the end of nuance at all, because that's what human relations are all about. That's the complexity of teaching. And if you think why you became a teacher, and if I think about why I became a teacher, it was because of that human connection. It wasn't, labelings and putting people in boxes and things like that. Yeah.
Great. So before we say goodbye, do you have any final thoughts, anything you want to say?
I suppose just what I mentioned a few minutes ago, that I think anything, and this goes far beyond teaching, that we're presented with, I think it's a very good idea just to think critically about it. And I don't mean criticize. I mean, okay, why am I being told this? Who's telling it to me? And who does it benefit? And who does it hurt? And because this is the thing, I think I remember Sarah Mercer once said this in an interview that I did with her. I think it was during the pandemic or post-pandemic, but anyway, she said, as language teachers, we are uniquely positioned to bring our values into the classroom. And we have to be super careful with that, because everyone, like you've mentioned in a very subtle way, some people who are very big in society who they had teachers. People who start wars had teachers. People who will end wars had teachers. And we don't know where that begins, our influence, and where it ends either. And it's so important that we're questioning all the time, and that we pass that questioning on to our students as well. That's what I would say.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Alastair.
Thank you, Graham. It's been a pleasure.
And so that's the end of today's Sunday Lunch Show. Many thanks to my special guest, Alastair Grant, for a very interesting discussion. And thanks also to all of you who joined us live or who are listening back to the recording. Thanks in particular to Fabian from Ecuador, currently in Azerbaijan. I'll let Fabian have the final word. In the comments, he said that Alastair made a great point when he said that we can't just accept something because it's data-based. Otherwise, how can we teach our students to be critical if we ourselves aren't? Very good point. So I hope you will join me. I hope you'll join me again next week at the same time. But for now, bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.